So, wow. So I'm someone who, you guys know, I'm very critical of Microsoft. That is kind of the thing that I've been known for in recent years. But I am not like, if they do something right, I am not going to just be like, yeah, I still fucking hate them because they suck, and I'm just going to keep hating them no matter what. Like, that's not how I roll. Gonna give credit where credit's due, because one of my main criticisms against them is that they don't have any games. And they showed the games. They definitely show them, and there's plenty of them coming out. So, hey, good shit, Microsoft. You did a lot better than Sony did during their press conference. They had pretty much nothing to show, while you guys had Fable, Gears of War, the new Call of Duty game, Perfect Dark, Avowed. Like, a whole bunch of these games look really, really good. Of course, they're meant to look good. Doesn't mean they're actually going to be. But hey, they they showed a lot more, and the short term looks a lot better if you're a Microsoft slash Xbox gamer than if you're a PlayStation guy. It's just a fact. Like, you got to admit that. One game I didn't mention, though, is Doom: The Dark Ages, which, obviously, you clicked on the video because of the title. It is a little provocative, and I know the vast majority of people, I'm going on a roll here, because I've had a lot of recent videos get dislike bombed. Most people watching this video are going to click the dislike button because they're not going to like what I'm going to say. If you're someone who's been watching this channel for the past 3 or 4 years, then you know exactly what I'm going to say. And it has to do with the fact that Doom: The Dark Ages has no online multiplayer. That hasn't officially been said by the publisher, but the fact that if you look at the Steam page, it says single-player game. Like, that's literally on the description of the pre-order. So that's one thing, and there are articles saying that the game is not going to have multiplayer. So I'm just going to assume that that's the case, because that's what happened in Doom Eternal. Doom 2016 had a full, robust online multiplayer experience, and then in Doom Eternal, they completely got rid of that, cut it out. They did have some, what was it called, battle mode that nobody played or cared about, and was definitely not a replacement of the multiple game modes that the Doom 2016 multiplayer had, including Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, and all the other modes that it had to offer. It was a full multiplayer, while all Doom Eternal had was a 1v2 mode, a shitty one at that, and people just instantly moved on to something else, while Doom 2016 still has online players to this day. So I don't want anyone to say, well, Doom multiplayer has never been a thing. Doom multiplayer doesn't have a community. Doom multiplayer is not something that is just a tacked-on experience that, you know, is just like whatever. It's just like a side thing and nobody cares about it. Anyone who truly believes that is just simply that they don't know anything about the Doom series and they don't know anything about the history of it. So Team Deathmatch and Deathmatch, these are modes that are synonymous with online multiplayer, especially FPS games. It's a huge part of gaming culture, of online gaming culture, is deathmatches. Where do you think that the term deathmatch came from and the deathmatch mode originated from? If you had to take a guess, which game series invented it? Do you think it's Quake? Unreal Tournament? You know, because those are, like, known as some of the original online multiplayer games, so you would think it would be one of those games, right? Nope, it was Doom. Doom is one of the original multiplayer games. It's all, obviously, single player has been the thing that is, like, the most known. Doesn't mean that multiplayer had no impact on the gaming industry. It was more impactful than even Quake and Unreal Tournament were. Doom 1 and 2 were fucking huge back in the 90s. Not just for single player, but also for online multiplayer. You can look at archives. If you actually look on YouTube and look up Doom 2 Deathmatch from like 1995 and 1997, people actually were able to record gameplay back then and upload it, and it's still watchable almost 30 years later. How fucking incredible is that, by the way? But yeah, to say that Doom was never a multiplayer thing and that it didn't have an online community and it was just always like a side mode that was just added in, you know, because that was a huge thing for so many years. Not so much these days. Games are usually single player or multiplayer and not really both. But for a while, every game had to have a single player and a multiplayer tacked on. There was a lot of tacked on subpar multiplayer experiences that didn't really need to be there. But that was never Doom. And people could be critical of later entries in the series having a disappointing multiplayer, but the sample size is so small. Because after this new game coming out next year, we've only had 6 mainline games in the Doom series over a 32-year period. Doom 1 and 2, like I said, were pioneers in the online multiplayer space. Like, if it weren't for those 2 games, what we have today we wouldn't have. So there's that. And then there's Doom 3, which people would say was not very successful multiplayer-wise. And in a lot of ways, it was just a forgotten game. It wasn't necessarily bad, but 2004 was a year with some serious competition. You had Quake 3, you had Unreal Tournament 2004, you had Star Wars Battlefront 1, Halo 2. And that's just talking about FPS games, never mind just the entire gaming industry that year. Like, 2004 was probably the most stacked year in video game history, arguably. Because you also had games like Metal Gear Solid 3, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, Gran Turismo 4, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Spider-Man 2, Simpsons Hit and Run. So there was a lot of competition. But just in the FPS space alone, it was so overcrowded that Doom 3 kind of got lost in the shuffle. And it was a good game in an era where we had so many fantastic games that it needed to do a lot more to keep people's attention. So I wouldn't really consider Doom 3 to be a failure when it comes to multiplayer. I thought it was a fairly competent multiplayer mode, but Doom 4 was really where a lot of people did not like the multiplayer, even though it was popular. And it had a lot of players throughout the entire prime of that game. Like, leading up to Doom Eternal and even after Doom Eternal came out, you had many people still playing the multiplayer for Doom 2016. So even though there was a lot of noise online about how the multiplayer sucked and it wasn't fun and it wasn't this and it wasn't that, there still were a lot of people, myself included, that absolutely loved it and would have loved for them to expand upon it and give us even more, because, like, it wasn't perfect. But I think considering the fact that id Software didn't even develop it themselves, they outsourced it to a different studio. So there wasn't really any coordination. They just kind of did their own thing, released their multiplayer mode, and it was just kind of slapped on at the last minute. Like, that is the first time we ever had that in the Doom series. It was 12 years after the last Doom game, and they just like, yeah, we're gonna outsource it. Like, you had so much time to actually give us a fully fledged single player, which they did. They succeeded at that. But multiplayer, like, yeah, they didn't really give it enough love and attention. The fact that they were just like, we don't even want to work on it, we'll give it to somebody else. Credit where credit's due, though, to the studio that did make it, because I thought it was a shit ton of fun. It really was. So there's your sample size. 2 groundbreaking, very important, innovative multiplayer games with Doom 1 and Doom 2. Doom 3, pretty solid, but not amazing. And then Doom 4, which I thought was great, but it was outsourced, and it did have mixed opinion. But if id Software were able to translate their vision and what made the single player great into the multiplayer, I think it would have been way more successful than it actually was. There was absolutely zero justification for id Software to completely kill Doom multiplayer, which is exactly what they did in Doom Eternal. The main defense that I've heard from the fanboys and the corporate shills defending this is that Doom Eternal is just such a much better game than Doom 2016, which, first of all, is subjective. Not everybody in the Doom community even agrees with that, but, hey, Doom Eternal, hey, we're talking about single player, great. I'm not going to argue against you. I personally have decided not to play it and to boycott it, and probably never play it ever because of just how angry that I am over the removal of multiplayer, which is essentially we're getting 50% less of a game than we did in the previous entry. A sequel is supposed to expand upon the last game, not take away from it in such a significant way. I mean, removing Snap Map alone took a lot away from Doom, because it wasn't in Doom Eternal, it was in Doom 2016. It was pretty much their version of the Forge from Halo, where you can create your custom maps, and it added literally an infinite amount of content. It was an integrated map creator. And they're just like, fuck it. We're not going to put it in Doom Eternal, because people are sheep and they're going to buy our game anyway. Because, like, look, the gameplay is refined, and it is a huge improvement. The gunplay and the movement and everything is definitely better in Doom Eternal than it is in Doom 2016, But that doesn't mean, well, in order for them to do it, they had to. They had no other choice but to completely remove the multiplayer for Doom because they need to focus all their efforts and energy onto the single player. Well, first of all, that's exactly what they did anyway with Doom 2016 because they outsourced it to someone else. So yes, I guess they did spend more money and resources having the multiplayer developed than in Doom Doom Eternal, where they just pooled all their resources towards a single player. Fine, but in my opinion, I don't think Doom Eternal was enough of a leap for it to be like, oh yeah, it makes complete sense why the multiplayer was taken out. Because again, it being an improvement is just, it's a baseline expectation. Any game that is given a sequel, the sequel is automatically expected to improve upon and build off of the last game. So to remove half of the game, for, the campaign wasn't even twice as long as Doom 2016. You can beat Doom 2016 in about 12 hours. Doom Eternal is about 14 or 15. And of course, if you want 100% complete, the hours are different. But it really isn't that much bigger and that much more than Doom 2016 was. It's corporate greed, because they knew they would get away with it, because yes, the multiplayer these days, compared to the mid to late 90s, is more of a niche thing. And the community is a bit smaller, and they figure, well, everyone's just gonna buy the game anyway, because the single player fucking rules, and is awesome, and is like no other game on the market, so everyone's just gonna be like, maybe it's a bit of a bummer that there's no multiplayer, but we're just gonna be fine and accept it, and move on with our lives. Well, not me. I'm still fucking pissed, and I don't care if I'm in the minority opinion. Just because I'm in the minority, and the vast majority of people may disagree with me in the fact that I think that Doom is completely dead now, and I never want to play a Doom game ever again, completely boycotting anything to do with Doom going forward, and I think it's a scumbag move to just kill the multiplayer, and I'm supposed to be fine with that? I'm supposed to be okay with that? I love all of these YouTubers that are, like, talking about these greedy companies, EA, Activision, Ubisoft, all these companies, and how greedy they are, and how anti-consumer they are. There's so many YouTubers that build their brand around talking about fucked up shit happening in the video game industry. But all of these big YouTubers that do stuff like that, not a single person reported and talked about the fact that Doom Eternal completely removes multiplayer, and that Doom the Dark Ages is doing the exact same thing. You are all hypocrites, because what id Software is doing to Doom is just as scummy and fucked up as all these other things that companies like EA and Ubisoft are doing to cut corners, maximize profits, and screw over their customers. The majority of people can disagree with me, but the majority of people will be wrong. Just like my Helldivers 2 video, where I got 23% likes and 77% dislikes, 77% of you were wrong. But y'all don't want to be called out on your hypocrisy, because it just proves that you guys talk about all the values that you have, about, what makes a company good and what makes them bad, but you actually don't believe in jack shit, because when your hypocrisy is proven without a shadow of a doubt, you guys shut down and you get really mad when people call you out. Most people disagree with you, so you're automatically wrong. Most people supported slavery in the 1800s. Most people, just less than 20 years ago, were against gay marriage. So I'm not gonna just because of the fact that most people are against me, doesn't mean that I'm like, oh, I am completely wrong and I have to accept that. No, fuck you all. Like, come on. Oh, I can hear the controversy right now after what I just said. Because low intelligence individuals like to twist your words, try to use them against you and make you look bad, while completely ignoring the context of the conversation. Because I can guarantee you a lot of people, after what I said just now, are thinking, Cynical Gamer compares people who like Doom to slavery and all these other fucked up things. No. You guys, if you actually think that, then you completely missed the point. I'm using an extreme example to prove that just because most people are against you doesn't mean that most people are correct. I think, honestly, it's a great life philosophy to, when it comes to finance and when it comes to just living your life. If you do the exact opposite of what most people are doing, then you're going to live a much better life than pretty much anybody else. Just saying. But, yeah, when it comes to gaming, honestly, this shit isn't really that big. Like, it really doesn't really matter in my life that Doom doesn't have multiplayer anymore. It really, it is what it is. I just move on. But because of that reveal yesterday, it kind of re-triggered some old frustration and anger that I've had built up over the years against id Software and I guess now Microsoft. But it's fucked up because, you know, Doom the Dark Ages is going to be 50% of the game that Doom 2016 was, objectively speaking. The amount of value and replayability that comes with a multiplayer mode, that being completely gone, it's worth a lot less. Whether you liked the multiplayer of Doom 2016 or not means jack shit to me, because I'm talking about me boycotting the game. Even though with Game Pass I can just play it and download it and don't even have to pay extra money, I don't care. I'm just going to pretend that the game does not exist. Because to me, the Doom series died in 2020 when Eternal came out, and it looks like it's going to stay dead for the foreseeable future. And one more point, think about long-term sustainability. Because I know there are a lot of people that are going to be like, well, business-wise, it just makes sense, because the multiplayer is not as successful as the single player, so in order, you know, as a business, in order to be profitable and be successful, yeah, sometimes they have to make tough decisions, and they need to do stuff like that in order to make the best game possible. Well, I hope you guys, you know, when it comes to sustainability and when it comes to profitability and all those other things that you may bring up when it comes to justifying the removal of multiplayer, I really hope that y'all keep that same energy going when the games keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, especially with the entire Game Pass subscription model, where there is so much less profit for these games now than there was before. Having a game that is essentially given away for free, this is something that I talk about all the time, about how Game Pass is simply not a sustainable model once you get into these day-and-date release, where the game is included with your subscription. It is absolutely guaranteed that Doom the Dark Ages is going to generate less revenue, significantly less revenue, than Doom Eternal and Doom 2016, because back when Doom 2016 came out, there was no such thing as Game Pass. You had to pay full price. So all the money that actually came from the individual game sale was a lot more than the sales that you would get. Doom Eternal did launch. It didn't launch on Game Pass, and I think its sales were actually very high because it came out literally right when the pandemic started. So there wasn't really any new releases, so it sold like crack. Like, it was amazing. And I think it was about a year after release that it became part of Game Pass. But now that this is launching day one, the first Doom game to launch on Game Pass, vast majority of people are not going to actually pay full price for it. They're just not. They already have Game Pass, they're going to play it. So what I'm trying to get at here is the removal of multiplayer is actually long-term, if they're going through this Game Pass model, is going to be a detriment to the Doom series, because they can't really justify having these big budgets for every single one of these games if you get it for free for your subscription. So where's the revenue going to come from? They can't just keep increasing the budget and making the games bigger and better with the Game Pass model. They can't do it. They're going to have to cut corners. They're going to have to decrease the scope and ambition of the game, you know, because as a consumer, your perception is going to be different if a game is a little bit disappointing or not as good as the last one, but for the last game you paid $70, for this one you're not paying anything, you know it's going to cause a lot of harm in terms of the actual quality of the game. Well, at least with Call of Duty, a lot of the revenue is going to come from the battle passes and the skins and the operator bundles and all that shit. With Doom, though, there is no other source of revenue except for maybe if they want to release a DLC, and then maybe you have to pay separately for the DLC. It's not part of Game Pass. That's a possibility, but they would make a shit ton more money if they had a multiplayer mode and had a battle pass and had skins and microtransactions and all that stuff that people are like, ugh, you know, what are you saying? That is such a horrible thing. But when done right, they could actually be good and not be too predatory against the consumer while generating a ton of more revenue for the game and for the publisher. And it's a hell of a lot more sustainable to have that multiplayer experience built in there than just having these straight single-player games being released, and there's no money that they're actually making now because of Game Pass. So think about that. It might actually be the one thing that would keep Doom as high quality as it is to actually have multiplayer and to have those extra sources of revenue. Even if the quality of the single player of the Dark Ages turns out to be just as good as Doom Eternal, it doesn't mean, oh my god, you're proven wrong, cynical gamer. Game Pass is actually great. because this is the early stage. This is the beginning. You know, when Netflix, when they started, they had a lot of high quality stuff when they began because they were trying to get a footing. You know, and that's exactly, they're investing billions upon billions of dollars onto Game Pass, making all the games great, but eventually something's got to give, and that's what happened with Netflix, with them cutting all these seasons short for these shows, decreasing the budget for their films, and all that kind of stuff. We're going to see a lot of that in the future with Game Pass trying to cut costs and reduce expenses, because right now they are bleeding money. You know, but they're hoping to be profitable one day. But in order to get profitable, you can't just constantly release all these big budget games on Game Pass. Because think about the movies. What movies are better? The ones that release at the box office first and then eventually go to streaming, or the ones that go from streaming from the beginning? Like, think of Netflix original films and think of like actual box office films. Really, like on average, like I'm sure you could think of like a couple of cherry-picked examples, but if we're just, you know, using a broad sample size here, yeah, it's a lot better, like movies that stand on their own and make their own money, so you can apply the same thing to video games. They're going to make money off the PS5 because PS5 doesn't have Game Pass, but that's it. PC and Xbox players are not going to pay for it. And with Call of Duty and all these other games, Gears of War, that are coming out day and date on Game Pass, you just think about the entire budget for all those games combined. How much additional revenue are these games going to generate for Game Pass compared to how much it actually cost to make all those games combined? And all these games are releasing in a very short period of time. Never mind all the money that Microsoft still has to pay to keep the old games on Game Pass, like the licensed games from EA and all these other companies, because it's not just Microsoft games that are on the Game Pass service. There's a bunch of indie games and all this other stuff. So the pie is being split up in so many different ways, and video games are just so much more expensive to make than even movies, and we're seeing in the movie industry how streaming is a bubble that is completely bursting right now, and most of these companies, except for Netflix and Disney Plus, they're all losing a fuck ton of money. So think about that. It's going to get even worse when Game Pass has more competition and more companies decide they want to be part of the streaming/subscription market. So if you're a real Doom fan, not only should you be in favor of multiplayer because it just offers so much more to the game, but you should also be against this Game Pass bullshit because it does no favors in the long term for any of these games, including Doom. The math just simply does not math. It doesn't. But more than that, it's just fucked up to, you know, try to claim that multiplayer is dead for Doom and no one cares about it, when not only is that not true, but it's also true that you guys didn't even try to make multiplayer successful and to keep it going, despite the history and legacy that Doom multiplayer has. So you guys can keep supporting these shitty companies because you're like, oh, well, I didn't like the multiplayer, so it doesn't affect me. Okay, you could do that, but I have the right to say, fuck you. You fucked me over, so I am never going to support you motherfuckers ever again. I am never going to play a Doom game ever again. I'm done. I'm never looking back.